Hello, I'm Hassan Ajami. I'm a Lebanese author and I work at Thunderbird School of Global Management. I teach there Arabic language and Arab Islamic culture as well. The topic today is about the Arab Islamic culture, and the best way to understand the Arab Islamic culture is to compare it to the Western culture, and this is exactly what we are going to do. Of course, there are many distinctions between the Arab Islamic culture and the Western culture, but today we chose just certain distinctions, some of the distinctions, and we will concentrate on them. The first distinction is between the high context culture versus the low context culture. And as you know, Edward Hall, the great American anthropologist and cross-cultural expert, did develop this distinction. The Arab Islamic culture is a high context culture, while the West is a low context culture. What does that mean? It means Arabs and Muslims tend to assume that you know the background information when they communicate with you. But of course, in the West, which is a different culture, belonging to a low context culture, we usually elaborate on the background information when we communicate with each other. And we define the terms and concepts which we usually use. But in the Arab Islamic culture, Arabs and Muslims tend to assume that you know the background information, so they don't elaborate on them. Also, in the high context culture, such as the Arab Islamic culture, we use a lot of metaphors when we want to express ourselves. And this is also important, which is each single word has a high significance and different levels of connotations in the Arab Islamic culture. For example, the word ahlan in Arabic means welcome. But ahlan comes from ahl, which means family. So when I tell you ahlan in Arabic, I'm telling you welcome, but at the same time, I'm telling you that now you are part of my family. So each single word has high significance in a high context culture. The second important distinction is developed by Richard D. Lewis. And as you know, Richard D. Lewis is a British linguist and cross-cultural expert. And the distinction is between multi-active culture versus linear active culture. Of course, many scholars discuss this distinction. The Arab Islamic culture is in fact a multi-active culture, while the West is, or tends to be a linear active culture. In a multi-active culture, such as the Arab Islamic culture, suppose as an Arab or a Muslim, for example, I would be performing different activities at the same time. For example, I would be sitting in a restaurant with you, talking about Arabic language, talking with another friend with us about partying tomorrow, calling my family, discussing family issues, for example. So we'll perform different activities at the same time because we belong to a multi-active culture. At the same time, in a multi-active culture such as the Arab Islamic culture, Arabs and Muslims tend to behave not in light of a definite schedule. So they don't act usually in light of a definite schedule. But in the West, usually we do act according to a definite schedule. Third distinction, which is between dialogue-oriented culture versus data-oriented culture. And this distinction is also very important. Also, it was developed by Richard D. Lewis. And the distinction goes as follows. The Arab Islamic culture is a dialogue-oriented culture, while the West is a data-oriented culture. What does that mean? In the Arab Islamic culture, we usually gain information through engaging in personal dialogues with others. But in the West, which is a data-oriented culture, we usually gain information through research, through analyzing data, using statistics, figures, etc. And this distinction is very important when we want to deal with the Arabs and Muslims, whether in business or in politics. So it's not enough to present to an Arab or a Muslim a business deal or a political agreement indicating through a certain paper or research, indicating certain data, etc. This would help, of course, but it's not enough to get the business deal and to be successful with the Arabs in business or in politics even. So the point is that we have to engage in personal dialogues with the Arabs and Muslims, because this is how they gain information. And this is important in order to maintain success in business and politics with the Arabs and the Muslims. Of course, we have mentioned so far three different distinctions between the Arab Islamic culture and the Western culture: high context culture, multi-active culture, and dialogue-oriented culture. These, of course, are coherent and they lead to each other. For example, suppose that I belong to a dialogue-oriented culture like the Arab Islamic culture. I gain information through personal dialogues with people. Therefore, I have to engage with many people as much as possible at the same time to gain as much information as possible. Therefore, I will belong to a multi-active culture. And if I belong to a multi-active culture, I'm performing many activities at the same time. Therefore, I don't have time to elaborate on the background or information, and therefore I will belong also to the high context culture. So the dialogue-oriented culture leads to the multi-active culture, and the multi-active culture also leads to the high context culture in that sense. The fourth distinction is between public space versus private space. And this distinction was also developed by Edward Hall, the great American anthropologist and cross-cultural expert. The space in the Arab Islamic culture is public, but the space in the West is usually private. What does that mean? It means that one space in the Arab Islamic culture is always occupied, metaphorically of course, is always occupied by others. At the same time, there is no separation between work, like business, and private life in the Arab Islamic culture. But of course, in the West, there is a separation between work, business, and private life. For example, let's take a simple example. Suppose that you are my colleague. We're not necessarily very close friends, but by accident, it happened that I met you in a restaurant without a previous appointment. I will approach you, I will talk to you, I might also spend the rest of the day with you, go to another places, etc., watch a movie, without a previous appointment. So here there's no distinction between work and private life. The space itself is not private, it is public in that sense. The fifth point is between the past-oriented culture versus future-oriented culture. And this distinction is very important indeed. It was also developed by Edward Hall. The Arab Islamic culture is a past-oriented culture, but the West is a future-oriented culture. In the Arab Islamic culture, because it is a past-oriented culture, this means that past traditions prevail in the Arab Islamic culture. People would tend to be conservative. And also decisions are taken in light of the past merits, not of the futuristic merits. And this point is very important to deal if you want to deal with the Arabs, whether in business or in politics. For example, if you want to present a business deal to an Arab or a Muslim, you should indicate that, well, this deal or this company was successful in Arizona, for example. So they will think, here the probability of accepting the business deal or even the political agreement would be higher. Because they take decisions, most Arabs and Muslims tend to take decisions in light of the past, of what happened in the past. And also, and this is also important, is that since the Arab Islamic culture is a past-oriented culture, that's why many of the Muslims would like to restore the golden past. The past, as they mention it from their perspective, the past of their Prophet Muhammad. It's their golden past. That's why they want to restore it. And from this point, fundamentalism, Islamic fundamentalism, would rise. Of course, in the West, it's totally different. The West is a future-oriented culture. We tend in the West to think about in futuristic terms. And that's why we are not really stuck in the past, contrary to what happens in the Arab Islamic culture. The sixth point is the following. It is reactive culture versus active culture. it was developed by Richard D. Lewis, the British linguist and cross-cultural expert. Here, this distinction is very important also if you want to deal in business or politics, and even politics, with the Arabs and the Muslims. The Arab Islamic culture is in fact a reactive culture, in the sense that most Muslims and Arabs tend to conceive change as bad and dangerous. So they reject change. They consider change bad and dangerous. At the same time, they consider that imitation and improvement are better than innovation. In that sense, the Arab Islamic culture reacts rather than acts. And this is, of course, very important if you want to deal with Arabs and Muslims in business and in politics. For example, if you present a business deal as this will change the situation, this will change you, immediately your deal will be rejected, whether it is a political agreement or a business deal. So instead, we have to present the deal, the business deal, or even the political agreement to the Arabs and Muslims as this is imitation of something which was done in the past, because it's past-oriented culture, and this will improve your economic situation or your political situation. Then the probability that the deal or the political agreement, the probability that it will be accepted would be really high. Of course, in the West, we can consider the West as an active culture because change is good in the West. We usually think and believe in the West that change is good and that innovation is great, while imitation and improvement are really bad in that sense. But what happens in the Arab Islamic culture is the opposite. In the Arab Islamic culture, change is bad and dangerous. Imitation and improvement are preferable to innovation. Of course, when I talk about the West, I mean North America and North Europe. Because as you know, the Latin Spanish people are very close in culture to the Arabs and Muslims. And even Italians, for example, they are close to, in their culture, to the Arabs and Muslims. Of course, not identical, but close. So the West here means North America and North Europe. Then we move on to another distinction, which is the following. The Arab Islamic culture is an uncertainty avoidance culture. In other words, it is risk avoidance culture. This distinction in contrast to risk-taking culture. This distinction was developed by Geert Hofstede, the Dutch theorist and cross-cultural expert. So Hofstede did distinguish between uncertainty avoidance, which means risk avoidance culture, versus risk-taking culture. The Arab Islamic culture is an uncertainty avoidance culture. In other words, it is a risk avoidance culture. In the Arab Islamic culture, most Arabs and Muslims tend to avoid taking a risk. At the same time, they are uncomfortable with uncertainty. But in the West, usually we like to take risks, and a risk is considered to be a good thing, especially if it would lead to beneficial results. But in the Arab Islamic culture, risk is bad. We avoid to take risks, and we are not comfortable at all with uncertainty. And this is, of course, it's obvious, it's important for business and politics when you want to deal with the Arabs and Muslims. So you will present your business deal or your political agreement, etc., as not as a risk, not as an uncertainty. Then the probability that it would be accepted would be really high. Now we move to number 8, which is the distinction between the collectivistic culture versus individualistic culture. Also, this distinction was developed by Geert Hofstede. The Arab Islamic culture is, in fact, a collectivistic culture. while the West is an individualistic culture. The Arab Islamic culture as a collectivistic culture means the following. An Arab or a Muslim tends to identify oneself with one's group, like one's family or one's sect, etc. And the loyalty is usually towards one's group. So this is a collectivistic culture. While in the West is an individualistic culture. Because in the West, each person identifies himself through his own achievements. And each person conceives himself or herself as an independent person, independent from the group. But in the Arab Islamic culture, the reverse is going on. Each Arab or a Muslim would tend to identify himself or herself with one's group. The final distinction, of course, there are many distinctions between the Arab Islamic culture and the Western culture. We show some of them, and we did elaborate on them and how they relate to dealing with the Arabs, whether in business or in politics. And now we will we'll move to another, the last distinction, in fact, which is the following. The Arab Islamic culture is an abstract-oriented culture, but the West is a concrete-oriented culture. I did previously mention the authors of the previous distinctions. This distinction is original, and it's a new idea, in fact. I thought about it like a year ago. The Arab Islamic culture is an abstract-oriented culture, but the West is a concrete-oriented culture. I will explain this distinction through three basic examples. The first example is about God. God in Islam is highly abstract. According to the Quran, nothing is similar to God. And the essence of God is unknowable. In this sense, the Arab Islamic culture is an abstract-oriented culture because it conceives God as highly abstract. But of course, as you know, in Christianity, so to speak, God was manifested in Christ because Christ himself has a divine status. So in that sense, the West is a concrete, or tends to be a concrete-oriented culture. Of course, just a single remark here, Muhammad, according to the Muslims, the prophet of the Muslims, Muhammad, according to the Muslims, he's just a man. He's just an ordinary man. But he received that message, which is Islam from God. So there's a difference here, but total difference between Muhammad and Christ. Christ has a divine status, according to Christianity, but Muhammad, he doesn't have any divine status in that sense. Only God is divine in Islam, and God is highly abstract. In this sense, the Arab Islamic culture is an abstract-oriented culture. The second example is the identity of the Arabs. Some Arabs are black, like some people in Sudan, and some Arabs are white, like some people in the Middle East. And the ancestors of the Arab came from different places. They came from Europe, from Far Asia, etc. At the same time, some Arabs are Muslims, and some Arabs are Christians. Of course, the Muslims are the majority. So in this sense, where is the identity of the Arabs? The identity of the Arabs could not be defined in terms of race because they belong to different races. Their ancestors came from different races. And also, the identity of the Arabs couldn't be defined in terms of color because some are black, some are white. Also, the identity of the Arabs could not be defined in terms of religion because some Arabs are Muslims, others are Christians. So where is the identity of the Arabs? This is the question here. In fact, and the Arabs know it, and they do express it, of course, is that the identity of the Arabs resides in Arabic language. Arabic language itself is the identity of the Arabs. They are all, these people, they're in North Africa and the Middle East, they are all Arabs because they speak Arabic language. So Arabic language is the identity of the Arabs. But languages are abstract entities. Of course, the things that we write on the board, etc., are just representation or representations of the language. So, the argument is the following. Since the identity of the Arabs resides in Arabic language, and Arabic language is an abstract entity as any other language, therefore, the identity of the Arabs is abstract. This is a powerful example of the fact that the Arab Islamic culture is an abstract-oriented culture. But of course, in the West, my identity in the West would be defined by my passport or by my ID, a legal document. But this is not enough in the Arab world. So there's a difference here. That's why in the West is in fact a concrete-oriented culture, because the identity would be defined in terms of something concrete, like a passport or ID. The third important example, and this is very important also, because I will use it to explain a certain phenomenon, is that about the Islamic nation, or the land of the Muslims. Let's say the Islamic nation. Most of the Muslims believe that they belong to an Islamic nation. Okay, let's look at the map. We will not see an Islamic nation, because the Arabs and the Muslims are divided into different countries, like Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Indonesia, which is the largest Muslim country. So, if we look at the map, we will not see an Islamic nation. But most of the Muslims believe that they belong to an Islamic nation. So where does it exist, this Islamic nation? In fact, the Islamic nation, or the land of the Muslims, is an abstract mental construction in the minds of the Muslims. And this is very important. So the land of the Muslims, or the Islamic nation, is not the land that I walk on. It is an abstract mental construction in their minds. But how is it constructed? The Arab Islamic nation is an abstract mental construction in the minds of the Muslims, and it is constructed mentally as the land of Muhammad, their prophet. This is why any criticism against Muhammad is equivalent to an actual invasion of the Islamic nation. And that is why some of the Muslims tend to overreact even violently if Muhammad is criticized. So the fact that the Arab Islamic nation is an abstract-oriented culture, the fact that the Arab Islamic culture is an abstract-oriented culture, explains why some Muslims overreact if Muhammad is criticized. Because the Islamic nation is a mental construction in their minds, and it is constructed as the land of Muhammad. Therefore, any critique against Muhammad is equivalent to an actual invasion of the land, of the Islamic nation. That's why some of the Muslims would violently overreact if Muhammad is criticized. Of course, here we provided an explanation of this phenomenon, and of course, our whole aim is to provide explanations. We'll stop here concerning the distinctions. Thank you for your listening.